Hi, I'm Sarah Pierce, and welcome to Okanos Kitchen. My love of food came from a family of cooks, never professionally trained, but all who loved food. I grew up in New York City, and we had a farm in Vermont from the time I was born. From that time, I learned about the importance of the land and the farmers and where things come from, how you grow things. I learned how to grow them myself. My father wanted to learn a little bit about everything, whether it was growing vegetables in the garden or making butter from the cows that we had. And my inspiration came from him. It came from my mother, it came from my grandmother, who came to this country before the Second World War. She was Japanese, she didn't even speak English, but from the time I was a tiny girl, I would stand next to a stool with her in the kitchen and just watch her prepare these amazing meals. I've also cooked in kind of strange environments. I've cooked in the tundra in Alaska. I worked for a fishing lodge in southeastern Alaska, and where we were flown in to a little out camp 40 miles from the Bering Sea, and I learned how to cook for people and I wasn't be able to go to a grocery store, so I had learned how to cook with what I had. Today, I cook for our company, Jacksonville Mountain Guides in Wyoming, and today we're going to make a couple of things that we actually cook for our clients on the mountain. We're going to start with my signature samurai bread, and we're going to eat that with some beautiful roasted tomatoes and brie, and then we're going to make a mountain high shepherd's pie named after the Grand Teton in Wyoming. Okay, we're going to get started with samurai bread. I've just poured in the mix from this bag that you can get if you order a kit online. So we're going to pour in some hot water, not hot, so hot that you can't touch it, but it's fairly warm water. We're going to just pour that into the mix and then stir it up. It's a pretty sticky dough, so you're going to have to, it'll probably take a couple of tries to just get it really mixed up. It's got only 6 ingredients. We have flour, salt, sugar, chia, and flaxseed. And that's what the dough looks like before you rise it. You let it rise. I'm going to use my fingers. And then I'm just going to put that aside and cover it with a plate, and it's going to sit for about 50 minutes. I'm going to bring the samurai bread over here to the stove where it's nice and warm, and it'll be much happier and rise faster. And then I'm going to start some stock. One of the great things about homemade stock is it tastes better than store-bought stock for sure. And you can also use all your old clippings from the vegetables that you've been using during the day. So in this stock, I'm going to cook up some carrots and onion and celery. And I'm just going to brown that. So I have a little olive oil in the bottom, and then or you don't have to use olive oil, you can use any kind of oil, and then put it on a high heat because I kind of want to brown the vegetables and bring out the flavor. In the back of the stove, I've got some potatoes cooking for the shepherd's pie. Okay, so now we're hearing that nice sizzle from the vegetables that are browning. It doesn't take that long. You can give them a couple of quick stirs. You get a little salt, pepper. You could even put in half of a garlic. And the thing about stock is you don't have to take the skin off, at least I don't. You can cut a garlic clove in half like this, stick that in. Garlic smells good. I'm also going to add a little herb de Provence, just some mixed herbs. I get impatient, but it's better to wait until they get nice and brown. Okay, these vegetables look great. I'm going to add about 12 cups of water and just let that soak. I'm going to add in a couple other pieces of old kale that I had, and the tips of some onions, some green onions. and some parsley ends. And that's going to make a beautiful broth. And, oh, the potatoes are ready. So I'll take those off. The potatoes are for our main course, the shepherd's pie. So I'm going to take those off and get those ready. And I can just put these aside until I'm ready to mash them up. Okay, now we're going to move on to roasted tomatoes, which I love making because you can buy roasted grape tomatoes all year round. So you don't have to wait until the summer, although this time of year we're obviously eating beautiful tomatoes from the farmer's market. So these are grape tomatoes that have been washed, and I'm just going to pour on some beautiful olive oil, or it doesn't have to be fancy olive oil, whatever olive oil you can find. And don't be shy. I would say for this many tomatoes, it's probably a 1/4 cup. And then I'm going to take some coarse Maladon salt, sprinkle that over, maybe a couple of fistfuls. A few red pepper flakes. And I just picked this sage from our garden in Vermont, and I'm going to put those in. I love sage in this particular recipe because the sage leaves kind of crisp up and caramelize, and they're pretty, and they make it yummy. So you put some sage leaves, and then I'm going to just mix it up with my hands so that the tomatoes get nice and coated with the olive oil. Nice black pepper. And that's it, ready for the oven. So I'm going to just stick that in a 350-degree oven. This is parchment paper, by the way, which kind of saves you from having to wash the pan, because they will drip. So we're going to get started with Mountain High Shepherd's Pie. And why do we call it Mountain High Shepherd's Pie? Well, this is a family recipe that we've been making for years, but we now make it for our company, Jackson Hole Mountain Guides. And we take people up the Grand Teton in Wyoming, and before they climb the mountain, they stay at our high camp at 11,000 feet. And we want them to eat something that feels good in their stomach, you know, good old comfort food. So that's why we call it Mountain High Shepherd's Pie. So here we go. We're going to saute the veggies, put a little olive oil in there. Love my olive oil. And then we're going to turn the oven on. The other thing that's great about this dish is that you can freeze it. And for our company, what we do is we make this in the valley fresh, we vacuum seal it, and then freeze it, and our guides put in their backpacks and take it up the mountain, and then our guides get to eat good food at 11,000 feet. But you don't have to hike to 11,000 feet to eat this good food. You can make it in your very own kitchen. It's a very simple recipe. So we're just going to saute. We're going to wait till these vegetables get kind of nice and browned. I'm going to add a little dried thyme because I love my spices. There we go. Maybe a couple teaspoons of dried thyme, or fresh. And then we're just going to wait until those get nice and brown. Okay. All right, so these vegetables are looking good. I don't like to overcook them, because I hate mushy vegetables, so I like them to be al dente. And then I'm going to add in this beautiful ground beef that's actually organic grass-fed beef from Vermont. All right, so we're going to let this nice ground beef, organic ground beef from Vermont, brown. Now when I'm in Wyoming, I make it with elk meat, but you can also, if you're vegan, you can make this dish vegan by using the Beyond Beef ground beef, which I really like. It doesn't affect the taste at all, and it's got a good consistency. And we're just going to wait until it loses its pink color. That takes about 5 to 10 minutes, just depending on how much beef you have in here. I used this is about 3 pounds of ground beef. Okay, I wonder if Samurai Bread is having a good time in here, so I'm going to check it. Oh my gosh, look how happy that bread is. It's really ready to go. So we're going to put the cover back on and do that next. Okay, so the meat is nice and brown, no more pink. Now we're going to add in just a cup of red wine. You can use well, if you have any red wine left over from your dinner party, you can throw that in. And then we're going to just let that cook down a little bit and give it some nice flavor. Definitely don't like to waste anything. Okay, let that cook down. Now I'm going to add some Worcestershire. And if you're vegan, because I told you you can make this vegan, you can buy a vegan Worcestershire sauce because the original Worcestershire has anchovies in it, which makes it not vegan. So I'm going to add a couple tablespoons of Worcestershire because that wine has cooked down enough. And then I'm going to add in about a tablespoon of tomato paste. Stir that up. I forgot the garlic, but it's all no problem. I'm going to dump that in because you don't want to overcook garlic anyway. So that's fine. Let that cook right in. And wow, my stock is looking good because the next step we're going to add a little stock. So let's taste it. One of the great things about stock is that you don't have to waste your vegetables. You know, when you're cutting up your carrots, the end of your carrots, the skins of your onion, the skins of your garlic, they can all go in this pot and it's just not fussy at all. And the thing about good stock, if you start with the right ingredients and you cook it properly, you can just basically have this as a soup. And of course we know the old adage of chicken soup in the wintertime, you add a couple of chicken bones to this and make a beautiful chicken stock that you can also have all the time in your freezer, in your fridge. So we're gonna just add a little bit of that. Maybe a couple of spoonfuls. And then we're just going to let that cook down a little bit. Now if I want it even thicker, what I can do is add what they call a beurre manier, which is basically a little bit of flour and butter that you mash up in a bowl. And then add some of this broth. And that way, it doesn't clump up in your dish. So I'm just gonna make a little of this mush. It's kind of mushy. And I'm not gonna put this all in or I'm just gonna end up having a huge blob of shepherd's pie. I made too much. Okay. Here, I'm just going to use only about a tablespoon of this actually. So I'm going to stick this in just a little bit. And that's going to help thicken this up. So it's going to be really yummy sauce with a samurai bread. Yummy! I'm going to taste it because you always want to taste and see if your seasoning was correct. Then the salt. It's amazing how much salt you need when you're cooking. Okay, I'm just going to add a little bit more spice, so it's just the way I like it. And I love crushed red chili pepper, so I'm going to add just a little bit of that, not too much for the people that don't like a whole lot of spice. A little more salt, and how you see how it's thick. The sauce is thickened up a little bit, so that'll be nice. Then I'm going to turn it off. And I'm going to add in some broccoli that I've just briefly blanched. Just a quick steam, and then run it under cold water so it doesn't get brown. And that's kind of important when you're freezing it. Like when we do this for Jacksonville Mountain Guides and I freeze it, I don't want the broccoli to be brown. And so I put it in after it's just barely cooked. And I do the same thing with peas. I mean, you can basically even put them in frozen because you're going to bake this. So this is like maybe a cup of peas. Then I'm just going to stir this up a bit. And then it's ready for the baking dish. And then we're going to put the mashed potatoes on top. So we're going to get this shepherd's pie going because it feels like everybody in the studio is kind of hungry. So I better hurry up here. We're going to take the shepherd's pie, and I have a huge pot of it. And we're going to put it in this baking dish and get it ready for the oven. Now it doesn't, you're saying, oh my God, she made too much shepherd's pie, but you know what? You can freeze it, and that's what we do on the mountain. So we freeze it, take it up, and actually add the potatoes later. Or I put the potatoes right in and freeze it, and that works too. But on the mountain we use freeze-dried potatoes. Oh, but they're still good. So we're gonna fill this up with a shepherd's pie that has a nice flavor from the broth and the vegetables aren't too overcooked. Nothing worse than mushy broccoli. I learned that from my kids, who are my taste testers, and they do not spare any criticism. So there we go, and I have basically enough to freeze for a whole nother meal. So this would probably make enough for, you know, 2 families of 4 or 5. But that, I'm going back to the stove, and I'm gonna get my potatoes. Oh, here we go. I pre-cooked these potatoes. And now we're just gonna mash them up. A little butter is already in there. I like to make them garlicky, so I put in some minced garlic. Then I'm gonna add a little half and half. Now I don't actually eat dairy, but so I use coconut creamer, which works really well in its place. Pour a little of that in. Just gonna mix that up. I'm gonna add some coarse salt and pepper, coarsely grated salt and pepper. And I'm gonna add a little fresh parsley in there too, just to make it, I love flat leaf parsley. I love the flavor of it, and it makes it pretty. So here we go, we've got some great looking mashed potatoes, and we're just gonna spread those on top. Get it ready for the oven. You could also freeze it just like this and then bake it. This was about 4 big russet potatoes. And if you want, you could sprinkle a little Parmesan cheese on the top. Now this is probably gonna bubble over in the oven, so I'm gonna put it on a cookie sheet with some parchment paper so we don't have a huge mess. All right, I'm gonna go back to the oven and stick this in at about 350 or 375. And that will take, everything's cooked, so it's only gonna take about 20 minutes for the potatoes to brown. All right, I almost forgot about the tomatoes, but I think they should be perfect. Oh my God, they're gorgeous. It's nice and caramelized with that sage that got nice and crunchy, yummy. You can let those cool a little bit, but what you wanna do is take this moment to put on some of your favorite cheese. You can have brie. I brought some cheese from Vermont because Vermont has the best cheese as far as I'm concerned. And this is a nice creamy goat and cow. And I just like to spread that on just to make it even more delicious. You can also use a vegan cheese, just any kind of melting cheese. And this recipe is particularly good with samurai bread. It also freezes, if you can believe it or not. And for Jacksonville Mountain Guides, I often make this very tomato dish, freeze it, and we serve it on pasta at high camp. So it makes a great even main course. And you can kind of have a bag of that in your freezer just ready to go. I can even show you, this is how we freeze it on the mountain. These are vacuum sealed, professional vacuum seal bags. And that's actually been frozen, but that's ready. Okay, so the tomatoes are done. We're just gonna put that aside and work on the bread. Okay, now my favorite part, samurai bread. Got to see how we're doing over here. Oh wow, perfect. It actually froze really nicely. It's very happy. So the first thing I'm gonna do is really grease this pan. And when you order a kit from my company, you get your very own bread pan made in Vermont. But since they're new, you really need to grease them. And then I'm gonna dip my hands in this really sticky dough. So before I do that, I'm gonna dip my hands in just some cold water so that it helps me get the dough off. And every time I mix this bread, I think of my Japanese grandmother, Okano, who my business is named after because she made this is her bread recipe. She came to this country before the Second World War, and she wanted to learn about American cooking. So she watched an American baking show, and she decided that she wanted to learn how to make bread. Now, Japanese people don't make bread, which you probably know. but she wanted to learn how to make it, and she made this up. So this recipe we've been making for over 3 generations. It's been a secret until now, and now everybody can make it. Everybody can make samurai bread. It's so easy. You can be a baker. It turns out anybody can be a baker. You just add water, you let it rise, you grease your pan, and now we're going to just let it sit for about 10 minutes and then put it in the oven. All right, I think the bread's ready. It's been about 50 minutes, but I want you to remember that samurai bread, one of the tips is that you start it in a cold oven. But it looks like, oh yeah, it's beautiful. And if it's not quite brown, you can slip it out of the pan and just let it cook a little bit longer in the oven. But that's looking good to me, so I'm gonna be careful, grab a pot holder, let that just sit for a little bit before we cut it. But yeah, it's looking good. The crust smelling good, the house smells good. I think I've got a lot of happy campers. And while that cools a bit, I'm going to look at my tomatoes, which are just beautifully caramelized, and after the cheese has sat here a little bit and just rested, it's melted in. You can see all these beautiful juices, and then you've got the crispy sage, crispy baked sage. I'm going to sprinkle some fresh basil on top that has been beautifully cut for me. And you can just smell the tomatoes, the cheese, the basil, and it's got this great juice. It's going to be yummy to dip the bread in. Look at the bread, get it ready to go. Now we're ready to slice it. Just wait for that first sound. You can see the flax and the chia seed, so it's not just a plain white bread. And it's got the most amazing crust. You never will be sorry about this crust. And the great thing about samurai bread is you can also freeze it. You can put this in tin foil if you can't eat both loaves, and just stick that in the freezer and then just stick it in the oven for 20 minutes, and it's just like new. I'm going to take a little spoonful and try not to spill and just spread that on the bread. And I think I have some people in this studio that might like to taste that. And there you go. Samurai bread with roasted tomatoes and brie. Okay, and for dessert, this was one of my favorite of my mother's desserts. It's a Vermont apple cake, which you can make with apples all year round. And the key for a nice moist cake is you soak it in some sugar, and then you add currants, of course a flour mixture, currants and whatever nuts you like, some vanilla. And I think this cake is almost ready. We just took it out of the oven. It cooks for about an hour at 350. Let's see. You've really got to grease these fancy pans because otherwise they stick. But I think this is going to be okay. Let's see if we, whoa, 1, 2. Voila! Harvest apple cake. And I think we should cut into it and see what it looks like. We are going to cut into this baby and see what we did. Oh, yum. See the nice big chunks of apples? This is another cake that will do really well in the freezer, so you can always have one on hand for your next dessert. Thank you for joining me today. It was really fun to share some good comfort food recipes from Okanos Kitchen. My samurai bread made with roasted tomatoes, my shepherd's pie, which I sourced with local ingredients, and homemade harvest apple cake from Vermont. If you want to learn how to make samurai bread, you can order it from my website, Okanos Kitchen. It comes with your own mixes and a bread pan made in Vermont. And check out my cookbook.